So let's get back to the Great Awakening, because I think that is really important when we read through this, is that the language is so important. And when we talk about linguistics, we have to be very clear that linguistics has power. Because once you take that and you package something using linguistics, and I'm not a linguist, and if the linguists in the room want to jump in, let them do that. But linguistics has power. Because once you define someone through language, and then that language has a negative connotation, by proxy, that person has a negative connotation. So let's get going. Students of history will note that notwithstanding all of these challenges, the late 70s proved to be the moment when the political right unified itself. Yes, because women had the right to terminate unwanted pregnancies. Contraception was widely available. There were massive protests against the Vietnam War, and people actually stood up for themselves. You had the civil rights movement in full steam, and people stood up for themselves. So yeah, I can understand if the Great Awakening kind of upset you. I digress. The Heritage Foundation is proud to have played a small but pivotal role in the story. That's bullshit. Once again, 43% of the contributors of this are affiliated with the Heritage Foundation. And this desire to play small is intentional. The desire to play small is intentional. Because if they had to tell the truth, that this is something that we want, it becomes less about a conservative mandate and more about ideology. And they don't want that. To quote the Heritage Foundation, freedom is a fragile thing, and it's never more than one generation away from extinction. Whose freedom? Whose freedom? Whose freedom? Whose freedom? Whose freedom? Whose freedom? It is not ours by way of inheritance. It kind of is for some people. It must be fought for and defended consistently by each generation. Okay, so the boogeyman is coming to take our land is really scary. Because this idea that there's something to be lost when other people have rights is, say it with me, boys and girls. Sasha, help us out here. It's ideology. It's ideology. The idea that by virtue of someone receiving more rights, someone having their voices heard, in some way disenfranchises us as Americans, leads us to believe that the foundation of what is an American does not include people who don't look like them. I'm going to let that marinate for a second as I keep reading. This volume, The Conservative Promise, is the opening salvo. Salvo? That's okay. Of the 2025 Presidential Transition Project launched by the Heritage Foundation and many partners. Again, it's very important that we keep saying 43% of the contributors are affiliated with one organization. And the other people, they don't have the influence. This is ideology. So let's just keep going. We are on the conservative promise of Project 2025. And I'm just going to read some excerpts from this. The Heritage Foundation is once again facilitating this work, yet almost 50% of the contributors have a direct affiliation with the Heritage Foundation, and the other 57% of the contributors, all 53 of them, have to share that side of the pot. So there truly isn't shared input. It's just not. As such, the authors express consensus recommendations already forged, especially among four broad fronts that will decide America's future once again. When 43% of the influence is centralized within one organization, it's not a coalition. It's just not a coalition. And at some point, I'm going to read down the list of all the contributors, maybe, if I feel like it, if it's important. But that is not the definition of a coalition. This is one organization who's been driving this message for over 50 years, who realized that they didn't get anywhere because people realized that this was one organization's ideology. So now what do? Hey, let's just grab some people, invite them to dinner, give them some free chicken dinners, and tell them that they're a part of it. Yeah, doesn't work that way. So in addition to the 4 pillars of the Heritage Foundation, which we're going to have to get a TA to kind of break that down to us in English, here are the 4 broad fronts. We got 4 pillars, we got 4 broad fronts, and it's all circular, people. Number 1, restore the family as the centerpiece of American life and protect our children. Okay, so here's the thing about protecting our children. Are you guys aware that the United States is the only member of the United Nations who did not ratify the Convention for the Rights of the Child? That's important. That's super important. Because one of the dog whistles that you will hear in this is we want to protect children. But then in the next statement, they will say they want to protect parents. And that parents know what's best for their children in all cases. Except if the parents allow the children to have a voice, then in that case, they got to go, because who are you? And you have failed as a parent. But we're going to get to that when we get to the Department of Health and Human Services and the Department of Education, because child, I would need my glasses for that, by the way. Number 2 of the 4 broad fronts. Dismantle the administrative state and return self-governance to the American people. What people? What? Wait. So in other words, you're saying that people have the right to choose. People should have the right to make their own decisions. People should have the right to make personal decisions for themselves and their family. But then you say that they shouldn't. Number 3, defend our nation's sovereignty, borders, and bounty against global threats. What global threat? Who's coming? Who? The United States has one of the most advanced militaries on this globe. And probably other globes. I don't know what's going on Jupiter, but I'm sure we probably have a better military than Jupiter. This idea that the boogeyman is coming to get us, we have seen how this has played itself out. We've seen this in Pearl Harbor. We've seen this with Desert Storm. We've seen this with Vietnam, Korea. We've seen how this plays out. And we want to... Okay, here's the deal. Making the other the boogeyman, it gives everyone a shared enemy. And once you dehumanize someone, you can destroy them. And when we say borders, we're literally talking about one border. Ain't nobody stopping folks coming from British Columbia and Ontario. That's not happening. It's one border. And it's the border where black and brown people are coming. Next, secure our God-given individual rights to live freely. What? You know, I gotta go. So let's just jump into these 4 pillars. I think it's important, and it really sets the tone for the rest of the presentation around Project 2025. So pillar 1, or promise 1, because it goes from 4 pillars to promises to, it's a lot. So Project 2025 is sort of a an amalgamation of like concepts and constructs and pillars, and there's almost like a rubric associated with it. And so, we're going to jump into this next one. We went from pillars to broad fronts, and now we're on promises. So let's just jump in. Okay, so promise number 1. Restore the family as a centerpiece of American life and protect our children. Okay, so one of the things that you're going to hear a lot is this emphasis on protecting our children. But again, the United States is the only member state of the United Nations that did not ratify the Conference for the Rights of the Child. So you would think if you really were about protecting children, you would align with your international allies, because the United States is still a member nation of the UN. But they didn't. And the reason why they didn't is because the CRC, or the Convention for the Rights of the Child, made higher, as far as ranking, children's rights over parental rights. And you can't have that shit. Like, how can I control my kid and call it discipline? How can I, whatever. So let's dive in. So promise number 1, restore the family as a centerpiece of American life and protect our children. So we started going down the list of all the horrible things that are happening. The American family is in crises. Okay, according to whom? 40% of all children are born to unmarried mothers. Okay. Including more than 70% of black children. So here's the other thing too. This dog whistle of, we got to save all the black kids. That's complete crap. All right. There's no government program that can replace the hole in a child's soul cut out by the absence of a father. Who's cutting out fathers? And the reality of this is that when you're talking about families, you're talking about individuals. You're talking about people. And if the people are not healthy, if the people in these families are unhealthy, what do you think is going to happen to the child? Let's continue. The world has never seen a thriving, healthy, free, and prosperous society where most children grew up without their married parents. Once again, the idea of marriage is ideology, because we do have examples of tribal communities where there was no marriage and the community thrived. But why do we want this particular type of a family structure? Because all you have to do is ensure that the leaders of that family structure align with the ideology, and then they indoctrinate their families. And then the next generation continues. Next, we're going to go on down the road, and we're going to talk about it's time for policymakers to elevate family authority. Remember, language is important here, right? Formation and cohesion as their top priority, and even use government power, including the tax code, to restore the family. So right now, what is happening through their first promise, is they're going to penalize people who don't show up in the way that they think that they should. That's not policy, it's ideology. If you don't show up the way I want you to, if you don't believe what I want you to believe, I will punish you for that. That is tyranny. You follow me? Today, the left is threatening the tax-exempt status of churches and charities. Yes, because we also have a separation of church and state. Yes. The Constitution that you all love to wrap yourself in and make love to, yes. We also have a freedom of religion, because a lot of this is heavily Judeo-Christian based. And I know that there are some rabbis in this, but it's heavily Judeo-Christian based. Today, the left is threatening the tax-exempt status that reject woke progressivism. Again, language is important with this. Woke progressivism? Okay. The next thing that we want to talk about, continuing right along, the next conservative president must make the institutions of American civil society hard targets for woke culture warriors. What is this? First of all, the use of language that's not woke culture warriors. Language is important. Remember welfare queens? Remember the other types of ways to destroy the character of groups of people? This is another one. And what they mean by woke progressivism and woke this and woke that, and when I read through this, I think I saw the term woke used over 600 times. It's like, okay, you use it more than we do. The woke people, that means. So there is this idea that in addition to addressing woke progressivism, it starts with deleting the terms sexual orientation, sexual identity, SOGI, no one's ever used that, diversity, equity, and inclusion, gender, gender equity, gender equality, gender awareness, gender sensitivity, abortion, reproductive health, reproductive rights, and any other term used to deprive Americans of their First Amendment rights out of every federal agency. What in the fresh hell are they talking about? Anything that's not, well, we're going to continue that. One of the things about Project 2025 that's absolutely mind-numbing for me is this insistence that any type of advocacy around equity and equality, diversity, inclusion, gender equity is in some way a direct attack on American society. The United States is by far one of the most diverse countries on the planet. We are very diverse. We are diverse in gender. We are diverse in race. We are diverse in sexual orientation. We are diverse in educational attainment. We are diverse in language. We are diverse. Yet what Project 2025 is attempting to say is the very essence of American diversity is the antithesis of American culture. Let's keep going down. And then it talks about pornography and things like that. And we're going to save that for later because it gets really, really crazy, right? And then it talks about education. Schools serve parents and not the other way around. But what if I'm a parent who actually thinks that diversity is a good thing? What if I'm a parent who actually thinks that my child learning that some children have two mothers and some children have two fathers and some children have one parent and some children live in blended families? Why is that not considered parents working to ensure that schools address their issues? Schools serve parents. Keep that in the back of your mind because we're going to dive into that. Furthermore, as we finish up the first promise to dismantle our country by ideology, it's restore the family. Allowing parents or physicians to reassign the sex of a minor child is child abuse and must end. First of all, who is doing this? Who's doing this? Next, there's no evidence of pediatricians, adolescent medicine physicians overwhelmingly performing gender reassignment surgery on unwilling adolescents. The other thing, too, I want to talk about is the use of the term child abuse, because everything from gender reassignment, using pronouns, listening to children when they say they're abused, everything now is being called child abuse. And we have to be very careful about that. Child abuse has a very defined connotation. It is codified in every state. It is codified at the federal level and at the international level, but once again, we didn't rectify the CRC, so we really don't give a shit about kids being abused. But now the dog whistle is anything we don't like, anything that goes against our ideology is now considered child abuse. And it is really important that people call that out. Calling a child by their preferred pronoun is not child abuse. Sending a child to a conversion camp and giving that child conversion therapy that is not endorsed by the American Psychological Association is.